Welcome, dear listener, to the Right Here, Right Queer podcast. I am joined by Maiga Doocy. Welcome, and thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, tell us a little bit about sorcery and small magics.
Sorcery and Small Magics is the tale of Leovander Lovage, who is a kind of impetuous sorcerer, I would say, and through a series of events that are in no way his fault, ends up bound by a curse to his arch nemesis, Sebastian Grimm, who is his complete opposite in pretty much every way. The two have a long history of not liking each other. But for the sake of undoing this curse, they form a reluctant partnership and agree to set off on a quest to a magical forest in search of someone who can help them undo this curse. And along the way, shenanigans ensue.
So many shenanigans, and it is such a whimsical world.
It is, yeah. I like a healthy dose of whimsy.
So, have you always written in fantasy? What drew you to kind of this genre?
Yeah, I've loved fantasy since I was a kid. I picked up Redwall when I was very small, and it was kind of off to the races. After that, I wanted every book that had a sword on the cover, which led me to a lot more magic-y books. And, I tore through Tamara Pierce and Garth Nix and Lloyd Alexander and just basically anything and everything that I could get my hands on in the fantasy genre. And it's always what I've been drawn to. I think what I really love are adventure stories, and fantasy does an adventure story really, really well. Quests are kind of so baked into so many fantasy plots. And that's also what I wanted to lean on when I was writing Sorcery and Small Magics. That's just what really appeals to me.
Redwall is such a formative experience, I feel.
Yes. Yeah, it's weird because there's no magic in it, but they're all animals, so it still feels like it fits in the fantasy genre. And yeah, I loved those books so much when I was a kid.
For sure. I feel like I can hardly remember them, but I read them as well, and I feel like if I picked it up, it would all just come rushing back to me.
Yeah, there's some that I read and reread like so many times that I still do kind of remember the basic plot. And it was like my first experience also with, I didn't know what fanfic was at the time, but it was my first experience with that desire to kind of rewrite a story, because the Redwall books actually could get kind of dark, and there was character deaths and there was all of these like tragic things happening. And I just remember as a kid like riding my bike up and down my driveway and just thinking about what had happened and like how I wanted things to happen differently.
I am sure there's Redwall fic out there.
Probably. I haven't explored that, but there probably exists.
Oh gosh. So when it came to making your own world and magic system, how did you go about it? Because yours is so kind of unique, I feel.
Yeah, it was very haphazard. I'm what people would probably call a discovery writer. So I learn a lot about my characters and the world as I go, particularly with the magic system in this book, which is, in this world, there you have casters who cast magic, and you have scribers who write the magic, write the spells, and they're two separate things. But when I first started writing the book, that wasn't the case. They were just sorcerers. They were just sorcerers who could cast these spells, and it was just much more basic. And how the magic system came about was kind of through like this reverse engineering of the plot, because I knew I needed to have Grimm cast this curse, but it didn't really make sense for him to cast the curse. If he's supposed to be like this great sorcerer, why would he mistakenly cast this curse? It just didn't make sense for his character. He's a very careful and methodical type of person, and it seemed like a really big mistake for him to make. And so I needed a reason for that to happen, and I stuck on it for a little while. And then I thought, well, what if he cast this curse because it's not his speciality to know how the spells work? What if, he knows how to cast the magic, but he doesn't know about the writing of it and the meaning of it? And once that clicked into place, so many other things fell into place too, about the world and what it would look like. And it was also really underscored what I wanted from the plot too, of that you have these characters who are very different and who have to work together. And then the magic system also requires these two different types of people to work together and to make magic work. And that's really how it came about, just from necessity and from noodling around with things. And that's how a lot of things come together for me.
Basically, you needed to blame Leo somehow, so you're like,
Yeah.
how can we do this?
How can we make this happen? Yeah, it's really funny how much I don't know at the start, how much I think I know, but then things end up looking very, very different at the end.
So the characters really kind of drive the ship for you, and you're like, oh, okay, this is where we are.
They do. They do. And the emotional resonance kind of drives the ship. Like, I always try and outline. I've tried to different extents to outline where I'm like, yeah, I think this is what's going to happen. And this all makes so much sense. And oh, I'm so excited about this. And like, I can convince myself of anything in an outline. And then when I start writing it, I'm like, oh my gosh, no, it feels wrong. Something is off. The feeling isn't right. And, listening to my intuition in that regard has led me to change a lot of things and make things like a lot more interesting. It's frustrating for me. I have to be in the midst of it and tearing my hair out to make those decisions.
I love that for you though, because I always second guess my gut and then I end up just wishing I'd gone with it in the first place. And I feel like even if it's leading you astray from your outline, it's just much better to just go with the flow and go with what your heart's telling you.
Yeah, I wish that my heart was like more clear on the specifics sometimes. Sometimes it's just like, no, wrong. And then I have to really think about like, okay, well, what is right? It's like I don't always have an answer right away. There's just a subtle feeling of like, I think this isn't fitting right. This isn't creating the feeling that I want from this scene or this line or this interaction. And so much of writing for me is really fine tuning all of that as I go.
Your characters, I feel like, are imperfect, but in like a very human way, and I like that about them. And they kind of flip a lot of stereotypes. Like normally it's the rich guy who's very serious about his craft, and it's the poor underdog that's kind of the rakish character. And they're really not like that, and they're still really don't even fit within their stereotypes. They come out that way, or was it intentional?
A little bit of both. I'm glad you feel that way. I'm glad you feel that like they don't perfectly fit the stereotypes because that is what I like to go for. But I think in some ways I do start out with not a stereotype, but like a more basic version, right? In this case, I knew I wanted Leo and Grimm to be opposites. So what does that look like? And you have kind of like this chaos gremlin character in Leo, and then you have Grimm who's very stoic and proper. And that's just kind of basic, right? And it falls into like, oh, grumpy sunshine, like a lot of classic tropes. And I find it helpful to start there and then along the way as I'm getting to know the characters really build out from there and be like, okay, but why are they this way? What drives them? What's in their past? How do they react to each other? And like all the little details and the things that really make them feel real and alive come as I'm writing them. Similar to how I build the world and the magic system, there's a lot I discover about the characters along the way until I finally feel kind of like I have a grasp of like in any given situation, what would Leo do? What would Grimm do? How would they react to this? And they feel more fully formed. And I think once they get to that point, then it lends itself well to not having them feel like a stereotype because, they have a whole system behind them, like wheels turning, little gears, like it's all there. It's less like I'm driving them and more like they're really driving the plot, driving the story.
And I feel like you said, like Grumpy Sunshine, like they kind of are on the surface, but it goes so much deeper than that. Like they're just very deep characters. Like, yeah, Leo is sunshine at first, but he's actually really kind of grumpy inside. And I feel like Grimm also is like appears very stoic and grumpy, and he is most of the time, but he also has this like soft side, and I really love to see that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me very happy because, yeah, I don't think, I think it's easy to throw around that trope and sure it fits in some ways. But yeah, I think Leo is actually like not a very sunshiny character at the heart of it. He has some tough stuff in his history. And he also, I think, is just a little too sardonic, maybe, to be a full sunshine character. Like, he's a little too sarcastic. He's got a little bit of an edge to him. Yeah, so there's more to them than that.
What made you go with Leo's point of view instead of Grimm's or doing like a dual point of view? Because that was normally with like, I don't even want to say Sorcery and Small Magics as a romance. Like, yes, it's very relationship focused, but in most stories like this, it's dual. So what made you decide to go with just one and why Leo?
Kind of just what you said there of that I think it's not a typical romance. Like, it has romantic elements to it, but there's a lot of other stuff going on and I'm not following traditional romance beats. So I felt like I knew I didn't want to do dual because I felt like that would be setting up the wrong expectation for readers, because that is just a very classic, romance setup is to have the dual POV. And I also knew that for the story, I felt like it would be a lot more fun not to have both of their point of views. Like there's so much of the story that operates on you not knowing what Grimm is thinking. Leo doesn't know and the reader doesn't know. And I think that makes it more interesting for the reader. I know people want Grimm's point of view, but I'm not sure if everyone truly wants Grimm's point of view because the story would be very different. There wouldn't be as much depth to it, I don't think. In very early versions, I had this story floating around in my head for years and years before I actually wrote it. And in very early versions, it looked really different. And it was actually from Grimm's point of view. But when I sat down to write it for real, I wanted it to be Leo because, first of all, Leo's the one who's cursed. So I was kind of like, well, it should be from Leo's point of view because he's the one who's having the curse cast on him. But also, when Leo's character started to click into place more, and he's this very kind of bardic type character, he plays violin, but also just his personality, right? He's a storyteller. And so it made sense for him to be the one telling the story. It's his narrative. And also, he's kind of an unreliable narrator, which I wanted to experiment with and have a lot of fun with. And it was a lot of fun to write it from his perspective.
He is so unreliable, and I love that for him.
Yeah, he's telling you the story the way he wants to tell the story.
I've talked a lot with a friend about this, so we were talking about this question, and that was exactly what we said. The story would not be the same at all if we knew both of their points of view.
Yeah, it would not be the same. And I'm not saying that like I would never dip into Grimm's point of view in some way, shape, or form, but it is the Leah Vander Lovage show. This would be a very different story if it was all told from Grimm's point of view. Like they're very different characters. The tone would be completely different if Grimm was the one telling it.
So, do you have a favorite out of the two of them, or in general, do you have a favorite from the book?
I can't choose between Leo and Grimm, really. Like I love so much about each of them. They're both very near and dear to my heart. And, they're two sides of a coin, kind of, right? Like it would feel wrong to choose one. I will say that I'm proudest of having written Leo. Like he's actually a really hard character for me to write. I find it really hard to sink into his way of being. He's this very like, he's such a showman, and that doesn't necessarily come naturally to me, and neither does writing in first person. So I think I'm proudest of writing Leo, but I love both of them equally.
Why did you choose first person?
That's a great question. I don't really remember exactly my thinking. I think when I was sitting down to write the first chapter, I noodled around with different ways of writing it, lots of different ways of writing it. There were so many different versions of that first chapter. And I think that when I tried first person, and I think there was probably a line in first person that just felt right and felt like it captured, like, oh, I think that's Leo's voice. And that's what felt right. I'd never written in first person before. It was a bit of a learning curve. I'd just come off of writing this other book that was all in third person. That's always what I was drawn to writing in, but it just felt right to have him be in first person. I think, again, because he is telling you the story, and it just allowed for that to really feel like that was the case of like he's directly narrating it.
So you really challenged yourself with this book in a lot of different ways.
By accident, yeah. In some ways, there was a lot of things that came very naturally, but certainly that was a challenge. And now I'm curious, if at some point I go back to writing third person, if that will feel like a challenge because I've been writing in first for so long now.
I did it backwards. I wrote in first for a few books, and then my last one I did third, and now I'm finding it hard to go back to first.
I think that third will still feel more natural to me, but we'll see. I'm looking forward to going back to it at some point. There's just a lot about first that I think sometimes the distance of third is just nice in a narrative sense. And with first, you're really close up and it can start to feel like you're really mired in it sometimes.
And I feel like it lends well to an unreliable narrator as well.
It does. It does. And that's ultimately what made it perfect for Leo. He can be like, well, this is what I'm telling you,
This is what I think.
It's that direct connection with the reader, as though Leo's like actually sitting down and writing it out with a pen, or he's, telling it to you, right in your ear. And I have a lot of fun with it, but I do still find it challenging.
So, one of the big themes in this book is true love, but I feel like it's not the true love that people normally think of. How would you define it?
Yeah, I think for me in this book, it's less about one person being someone's true love, that fairy tale ideal, right? True love's kiss or whatever. And it's more about the depth of feeling required to earn that title, or not even the title. Like that kind of doesn't even enter into my mind so much. And it's also about there being different types of true love, right? Leo has a friend who he's really close to in this book, Agnes, who, there's true love between them also. And yeah, that was important to me too, to show that there's lots of different types of love. And it's about like your depth of caring for someone. It doesn't even have to necessarily be in a romantic sense. That was something I really enjoyed playing with in the book.
And it's a really big slow burn between Leo and Grimm. I mean, we can't even say they're not together by the end, really.
Yeah.
So, what makes for that really good slow burn for you?
I mean, it's right there in the name, right? Like, I want it to be slow. I want it to be really, really slow. I want it to take ages and for the burn to creep in so slowly that you don't even know what's happening until there's a fire, right? That's kind of that frog in the pot situation. And I think also what makes a slow burn for me is getting the reader in on it too. Like, I want there to be a slow burn between the book and the reader. They're part of the process, right? It's not just between the characters that you're reading about, how the reader is engaging with the book and what is being withheld from them. And I think there's some people who won't enjoy this, right? Because there's not enough heat in the relationship or because they feel like they're not being given what they want. But I think there's other people, myself included, where that's exactly what they want. It's about the anticipation involved in a slow burn. And it's almost like you get to experience everything twofold that way because there's all the scenarios you're thinking about that you want to have happen, the things that you hope will happen in the book. And then there's what actually happens, and you get to experience that too. And just that to me is, the full power of a slow burn is that the reader gets to really feel like they're a part of it because they want it to happen so much. I just love a slow burn.
When that finally moment hits and you're like, you idiots, finally.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's so much, like you're cheering and you know that they're falling,
Yeah.
but they're both denying it. And you're like, guys, come on.
Yeah. And I think it's also about having reasons why they're not realizing, right? Like, I think that there's some elements in the book, not to be too spoilery, but there's some elements in the book that really add confusion, especially for Leo in knowing his true feelings in this situation. And he's not maybe the most observant of his own feelings in any given situation to begin with, but there's also a complicated element because of the curse and the way that it operates where it kind of makes sense that he wouldn't realize what's happening right away. And also, I think going forward, it will continue to cause complications when that is your starting point. How do you move forward? What does that look like? That's always something I was really interested in exploring. Like this is just kind of the start for them.
So you don't have to tell me when, but everyone I've talked to has a different theory as to when things change, we'll say, when
Yeah.
it happens.
Yeah.
Is there one moment where it's like it clicks for Grimm and the things break, or is it like a series of moments, or is there like one big that was it moment for him?
I think there's a lot of lead up, right? There is a lot of lead up of where their relationship is changing, right? Where they're starting to develop a little bit of mutual respect for each other and all of that feeds in. But there is in my mind a moment when the spell actually breaks. There is a moment where like something clicks and the spell breaks. And I can tell you what it is, or I also like to leave it open to people to interpret what that moment is for them. Like I'm not someone who feels like if I felt like readers needed to know what that moment was for the book to work well, then I would have put it in there. I don't think you have to know what that is, but I do know what it is. And there are some people who have gotten what it is. A friend of mine read it right away and was like, oh, this is when it happens. And I was like, yeah, that's when it happens.
Well, I'll ask you discreetly on the side. I won't spoil it for everyone else, but that is good to know.
Yes.
When do you think characters, maybe not so much Leo and Grimm, or maybe them, like when do you think characters have earned that romantic bond? Like what needs to be achieved for it to happen?
I think it's so different from character to character, right? It's such an individual thing. And that's the great part about writing romance, right? Is figuring out what it's going to take for these particular characters to earn that from each other and from the narrative. Those details and getting them right are really, I think, what makes a romantic arc feel earned to me. Because pure attraction and a physical bond might be enough for one character, but completely off base for another. I don't think there's one right answer to that. I think it's really dependent on the characters and the story that you're telling. I mean, that's why romance is so popular and does so well, is because if you were telling the same romantic story again and again, it would get old. But because of the nature of telling these different stories about different characters, there's always a million different possibilities.
So, in my mind, I don't know if this is true because we don't really know a lot of Grimm's backstory or who he's been or not been with. But to me, he's kind of like demi-romantic.
Yeah, I would say that that's accurate.
Do you think for him, like, it was just first that respect, and he had to actually, like, realize he liked Leo and didn't just get so annoyed by him? But, like, what do you think for him had to be achieved?
Yeah, that sort of mutual respect and also trust, and also realizing that their values are actually more aligned than either of them realized to begin with. And I do think that there is also just an element of attraction there, right? It's mixed up in years worth of antagonism, but I love an enemies to lovers trope. And I don't really think that Leo and Grimm are enemies, right? They don't want to kill each other or anything. They're not true enemies. But somebody did once refer to them as annoyances to lovers. And I really liked that. I do like the idea that there's like this spark between them that is very misdirected at first because of how they view each other, but there is a spark there. And it's when the rest of it kind of comes into alignment that things click for Grimm. And I will say also, I did say that there's a moment where it clicks for him, and that is true. But I don't necessarily think everything's decided for him. We talked about true love earlier, and there being like many different interpretations of that. And I think that that's true for Grimm also. I'm not saying that he doesn't think of it romantically. Like, obviously that is an element of this book, but I don't necessarily think it's like one moment and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm completely head over heels gone. Like, it's not necessarily as sure as that. Like, like I said, there are complications and there are things to sort through, and the feeling that is there is genuine and has that element of true caring to it. But it's not necessarily simple.
Maybe for him, it's kind of parsing out like what romantic feelings even are and how that might differ from how he's cared about people in the past.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also, in this situation, even having the feelings there, I think there's an element of wondering what is true because of the situation they developed in. And that is a confusion too, and a thing for him to sort out, and something that he maybe hasn't had to deal with before. And, Leo and Grimm are not always the most forthcoming with each other. That part hasn't been entirely earned yet. They've had this one experience together that has brought them a lot closer. But there's two more books to go, like we gotta keep building.
Do you think that's why he lies? I mean, obviously know, but is that why he lies to Leo at the end of the book? Do you think he's just not ready to explore all of that yet?
I think it's twofold. I think that part of it, yes, is Grimm's own confusion and his uncertainty. And I also think Grimm's a very noble character in a lot of ways. And I think that there would be some concern for him over not wanting to. He spent this whole book having this influence over Leo. And I think he would still hold a lot of concern and care with that in mind.
He's got to give Leo some dignity.
Dignity and also I don't want to say too much because I do get into it a little bit in the next book.
Okay, okay. So there are two more books. How do you maintain the tension and progress of the slow burn when you're trying to keep the audience in it for the long haul? Like, how much is too much?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's something I think about a lot. There's a few different elements. So having other plot points, basically, right? Like, you want to have a strong A and B plot going on. In book one, it's a little weird because the A and B plots are very entwined. You know, you have them trying to unravel the curse, and then you also have Leo and Grimm getting to know each other and, you know, becoming reluctant allies and then maybe friends. But the two overlap a lot because the curse is kind of helping the other one along. So moving forward, I was like, oh, I kind of need to have like a much more distinct A plot driving things forward. So that is also drawing a lot of attention and focus and really building that up. So you're not just like wallowing in the emotion for too long without it really going anywhere. I also think that building things in a way where you can let readers draw connections themselves and not spelling everything out when something significant happens every time, and basically dropping these little Easter eggs that a reader who's paying attention will notice and point to and be like, hey, did you see that? But is not necessarily addressed in the text right away. It kind of keeps things building without you having to address it right away. And I think it really does come back to the slow element and pacing things accordingly, because if you get too far ahead of yourself, it will feel like you're just twiddling your thumbs at a certain point, waiting for something to happen that should have happened already. So it's not just about maintaining the tension, but starting off slow that you can constantly build upon it throughout the whole story and never letting it just sit idle, constantly upping the ante a little bit.
But not too far where that's like kind of ruined the pace.
Yeah.
It's a marathon.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I like to say we're here for a long time, not a good time. And hopefully we're having a good time too.
Leo would disagree.
Yes, yeah, hopefully we're having a good time too. But that's kind of the spirit I approach it in, is that I don't ever want to get too far ahead of myself too soon, because then where are they going to go from there?
So you were saying like not spelling everything out for the reader. This is something that I and a friend of mine have noticed reading your book and really admire. And basically everything we've read afterwards has kind of been ruined for us because we're like, wow, it's just the way you do it and you kind of you lay these breadcrumbs and you don't spell everything out. And I really like that. And I think that there's been a lack of trust in readers in a lot of books I've read lately. And it's nice to be able to kind of fill in your own lines. And I know originally this book was a lot longer. So was it always like that, or did you end up cutting a lot? Well, I mean, I know you did cut a lot, but as far as telling the reader everything, I mean, how was that?
Yeah, so it was originally a lot longer. I'm a huge overwriter. When I was drafting the first book, you know, I think the final book, the published book, is probably around like, you know, 107,000 words, somewhere around there. But I have a Scrivener draft somewhere that's over 200,000. And that's a lot of things. It's partially just like I over explain everything as I'm writing. And it's also that like I write down every little snippet as it comes to me. And I also had folders in there that were like ideas for books 2 and 3, things that I thought would go in there. And it was all just right, all in the same Scrivener doc, very chaotic. But in terms of what you're talking about, of like kind of the subtlety, I knew I wanted that from the beginning. It was certainly less subtle in those early drafts because I do need to over explain and tell the story to myself first. There's certainly things that I was like, actually, I don't need to put this in. I feel like it's implied, and that I cut out. But there were other bits that I always knew were not going to be laid out clearly, right? That they were going to be things that like, I need the reader to know this, but Leo doesn't know this. And I need to write it in a way where it will make it clear to the reader, but Leo is not telling them what is happening. That was always the plan, because I'm someone who I really enjoy books that have a good rereadability factor to them. And I think that's often what makes that for me, like, is that there's things that you get upon reading the book a second time around that are not apparent the first time necessarily, and trusting the reader to pick up on those things. Not necessarily that they're going to go back and everybody's going to go back and reread, but there are things that you can get the first time around if you're paying close enough attention to. And not everybody is going to. That's the thing, right? You kind of have to just be comfortable with the fact that like not everybody is going to get this. And you can still understand what's going on. It will deepen your reading experience if you catch these things. But I'm writing for the people who are reading to notice those things. And the ones who do really appreciate it. And that's deeply satisfying to me when I see people catching up, you know, those little breadcrumbs that I dropped. that's what I'm doing it for. That's so satisfying to me.
I love rereading, and a friend of mine read it back to back, and we were
Yeah.
talking about all the things that I really missed the first time. We were like, "Oh, this is what this was about," kind of a thing. And I love that about books, and it's definitely inspired me going forward to just. And I like how you put it, like you're telling the story to yourself the first time, and then afterwards, kind of figuring out.
Yep. There's some things that I need to know that the reader doesn't need to know, right? There's so many little things too that, and they're not always like, fun little breadcrumb things. Sometimes there are world things that end up not making it into the book because they're not really that important, but it helps me to know them. Yeah, there's a lot that ends up getting cut.
Do you think you'll ever release that kind of stuff, like in a Patreon or something like that, or are they just like going to be in the graveyard forever?
I think I won't know until it's all finished, right? Because there's some things that I'm like, oh, maybe I can use this later. It's not like it all gets cut and I never look at it again. But there's some things that are just like, this is cut because it was a paragraph and all it needed to be was a sentence. And that's really all it needed to be. Like the paragraph was not doing anything. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't, helping. It was just me circling around something that I wanted to say. And then I finally figured out what I wanted to say. And it really only took a sentence. So that stuff nobody needs to read. Like it's not, I know people are excited and they think it would be interesting, but like my first drafts are really bad. Like they're bad even on a prose level and nobody actually wants to read that. But I might at some point, like maybe if I looked over it and thought it would be interesting, could do like a chapter comparison of like, okay, this is what it started out as, and this is, the finished product. We'll see. I don't know if I would do that. I don't know if I would actually do that, but it's a possibility.
Good to know.
Yeah.
So, what has the author experience been like for you so far?
It's been pretty good. Readers have been really great, really lovely. I've had great reader interactions when I've done events or people reaching out on social media, and it's gotten good word of mouth. I think just from people enjoying it and telling their friends. I also have had great interactions with booksellers. Booksellers have been so great and chosen it for staff picks or, hand sold the book, and all of that really makes a difference and has been really lovely. It's also like having a first book out is also very weird and overwhelming because it's a completely new experience. So I still feel like I'm processing everything I learned from that and figuring out how to apply it moving forward. But yeah, it's overall has been very good.
Everyone I've talked to about it are like, oh my gosh, it's the first, like, that's her first one. But you have written some short stories before, right? And have some published?
Yeah, I have a few short stories that were published. I haven't written like a lot of short stories. It's not something that I've continued on with because then when I got deep into writing Sorcery and Small Magics, that kind of just took over my whole brain. And then publishing it and everything too. I'm kind of one track when it comes to projects and immersion. But I did write a few short stories that were published. And before that, when I was really starting to dedicate more time to writing, before I'd finished any full length novels, I had a lot of trouble finishing things. And so I did spend a year. I was like, okay, for a year, I'm going to write one short story per month. And I'm just going to get used to finishing things. And they can be really short, they can be a drabble, it can be 100-word drabble, but I just have to finish it. And so I spent a year doing that. And that was really helpful for me just because I'd never finished anything before. And to get in the habit of doing that and having that feeling of completion at the end was really helpful. Then at the end of it, I ended up taking a bunch of those and squishing them together. I liked the characters from a lot of them, and it ended up being my first full length novel that I finally finished after having that practice with short stories. And then Sorcery and Small Magics was the second full length thing I finished. So I would not say that I'm like a very accomplished short story writer at all. Like it's a whole separate art form that people, there's some people who just dedicate themselves solely to that. But they were really helpful to me and I did enjoy doing it a lot.
Do you miss writing in short form or do you prefer writing longer?
I miss the high of finishing things quickly. I'm a really slow writer, so I certainly miss that. I think that I derive more satisfaction in the long run from working on novels. There's just more room to, like I talked about, all the little breadcrumbs that I like to leave. Like I think that stuff works better for me in long form But, I'm not saying that I would never write another short story for sure if I had the right idea. I think a lot of my ideas tend to be more suited to novels.
Are there any like themes that you find yourself revisiting or themes that you really enjoy writing?
I don't really think about broad themes very much while I'm writing, but looking back, there are some things that tend to sneak into a lot of the stories that I'm telling. And the first is probably, how to put this? I think just kind of exploring that gray area of a system that is not necessarily bad or evil, but that serves too many people to care about the needs of an individual. And I want to write about that individual and how they're pushing back against that or finding their own way of doing things and what changes that might cause. That's one that I end up being like, oh, there it is again. I did it again. And it can be in really small ways, right? Like it's not necessarily about a character like defying a whole system. It can just be in smaller ways. The other is characters who are meeting their limits in some way. I experience a lot of fatigue that sometimes makes it hard to do things that I really want to do. And when I look back, I realize that I wrote a lot of that into Leo's struggle with the curse and how it restricts him and how he comes up against certain difficulties there. And I've done it again a little bit in book 2, I think, in a kind of more intentional way. It was a little bit of a oops, I didn't realize I was doing that in book 1, and now I'm kind of doing it a little bit more intentionally. And it's never a one-to-one of my own experience, but I do like drawing certain comparisons and finding ways to explore a fictionalized or parallel version of things that are familiar to me. And I think there's something kind of cathartic about that.
So with this fatigue and, especially writing a long book, like you said, you kind of don't get that good serotonin boost of a thing being finished. What motivates you to keep going?
Writing is probably just the most fulfilling thing that I do. And it doesn't always feel that way, like the kind of always chasing this feeling. It used to be that I could write a page and, handwrite a page in a notebook. And I would do that and I'd be like, I have accomplished my goal in life for the day. Like, just that feeling of like, I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. And now, I've done it a lot more. So it takes more to kind of find that feeling, but it is still there. It is the thing that I do that makes me feel more in line with like, oh, like this is just kind of what I'm meant to be doing. And there's also, like I said, I'm a really messy drafter. So I spend a lot of time just angsting over that when I'm writing, right? Like, oh, it's so messy. It's so far from what I want it to be. But when things do start to come together, it's the most satisfying feeling. It's like, things clicking into place, like something that's really that you haven't been able to make work finally falling into place is just one of the most satisfying feelings. And I know if I keep going I will get there, and so chasing both of those feelings is huge motivation for me. It just takes longer and longer to get there. It's kind of like, it's weird because I feel like the more experienced you get at writing, the harder it is to reach those feelings, which feels counterintuitive, but it's true.
I feel like you put more pressure on yourself after you've done the thing once, and it's like
Yeah.
don't want to say it's not fun anymore, but it's like it feels like everyone's watching and it's just different.
Yes. Before you release something to the public, you're just doing it for yourself. It doesn't matter how long it takes. You're just kind of like, in your little writing cave. And it is very different when you're doing it for other people. But I still do work to try and find the part of it that is just for me, of like, the personal satisfaction with doing it. But the bar does keep moving each time.
You talked a bit about the books that got you into fantasy. Are there stories recently that inspire you?
I mean, so many. I try and read a lot because I find it really helps me while I'm writing. In particular, since writing these books, I seek out a lot of first person stories because when I'm really in the weeds, it's very helpful to pick up a book and be like, ah, yes, this is what good narrative sounds like. So a couple in particular that, were really helpful to me are Uprooted by Naomi Novik is one of my faves. And I think it's just a wonderful example of first person narrative that's very whimsical and lyrical without being heavy. I love that book. And also, kind of on the flip side, I really enjoyed The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett, I think. It's a much more kind of straightforward and blunt first person narrative, but also just like so well written and just moves through the story so quickly and efficiently. And I love reading both of those books and being like, just on a craft level, like, like I see how you're doing this. This is really interesting. And then very recently, I'm still in the middle of it. I'm reading The Red Winter by Cameron Sullivan, which is also in first person, but is like first person that hops around between kind of a couple different characters and timelines, and there's footnotes, and like, is a wildly different style of first person. And I am also always constantly inspired by the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. They're so beloved to me because they run through every emotion, and they're also so hilarious while also being absolutely brutal. I think I'm very inspired by books that can weave humor in a way that doesn't always mean being laugh out loud funny, but sometimes it is, but it can also be dry or sarcastic or dark. But it just heightens all the other emotions, I think, when you can laugh somewhere in a book. I find myself more and more inspired by books that have that layer of humor to them.
I have The Red Winter on my shelf. I haven't read it yet, but I heard it's really good.
It is really good. It is really good. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. Yeah, it's beautiful. And there's like footnotes in it. It's very intricate. It's lovely.
And with the Locked Tomb series, I have not read it, but I think that book kind of trusts the readers a bit too much, I hear, or you're kind of left going like, what is happening?
And that is like catnip to me. I have read those books 3 or 4 times now. I get something new out of them each time. They are so wild. They are so at times incomprehensible, but always in a way where I feel like there is a purpose to it, right? Like it's never confusing because Tamsin Muir didn't know what was happening. And I really appreciate that. That really works very well for me. A lot of my favorite books and just stories in general, I guess, are ones that require that trust from the reader or viewer, right? It happens in shows too, where you're like, what is happening here? And I love that feeling when I'm like, I don't know what is happening yet, but I know we're going somewhere with this. One of my favorite all time series is a historical fiction series by Dorothy Dunnett called The Lyman Chronicles. And the first book in that series is the only book that I have ever read and then immediately started again from the beginning. Because once you get to the end and you know all the stuff, like it's a completely different reading experience. But it is a book that is really, similar, I guess, to how some people feel about The Locked Tomb. It is kind of incomprehensible at times. And apparently that's something I just really like.
I was going to ask next, what do you hope to accomplish with your stories? But clearly, it's stumping the reader until the right time.
I mean, I don't know that I am that hardcore, right? Like, I don't think that I'm accomplishing quite that level of confusion, right? My little breadcrumbs are not on the level of The Locked Tomb, but it is something that I like, and I hope that I can manage to carry through some of that throughout the series. On a personal level, the goal is always about, like I said, chasing that same feeling of fulfillment and moving towards that. But what I want readers to take away, I think, is that they've experienced kind of the full gamut of emotions at the end of it, right? Like that I provided that. So maybe a little bit of confusion, but also you spent some time laughing or feeling sad or personally affected. And then other times you kind of want to throw the book across the room or kick your feet a little bit because something delightful just happened. I think that's what I would like readers to take away.
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? Get readers passionate enough that they throw your book.
Yeah, it is. It sounds so mean. I don't mean it in a mean way, but I know that like I love when I read a book and there's something in it where I just have to put the book down for a minute and stare at the ceiling and just have my feels about it, right? And that I think if I could manage to make anybody do that, that would be great. That's what I would like readers to experience is like, "Oh, I just have to think about this for a minute."
Well, I know in my experience you have achieved that with me and several other people, so we
Yay.
just got to spread the wave.
Yeah, mission accomplished. I'm satisfied.
So, what is next for you? I know you have the next two books, but is there anything else readers can look forward to in between or after Leo and Grimm?
Likely not anything big. Like I said, I'm pretty one track mind when it comes to writing. I'm just fully immersed in Leo and Grimm and their story and their world and getting that done. And I'm quite a slow writer, so it really takes that for me to get the book out. But once they're finished, I don't have any specific plans. I have lots of ideas, but I don't know which one will be most appealing to me at the time the series is over, right? I might be in a completely different place or have thought of a new idea by then, but I do have some options. I tend to have back burner ideas for a really long time. I mean, Leo and Grimm were on there for a really long time. I think it was probably like 10 years before I actually for real sat down to write their book. So I have other ideas like that too that have been kind of percolating for a really, really long time and changing over time. And I don't know which one will be the right one when I'm done with this series. So it's a mystery to me, too.
What about the book that you wrote before them? You said you had this is your second one because you had written one before. What's that one about?
Yeah, so that one was, like I said, my first full length novel, and it went through a huge metamorphosis actually. It was a YA book, and then I ended up revising it to be adult. And it was a book that I got into a mentorship program called Pitch Wars with, which was a really great experience. And I met a lot of my writing friends that way. And it also kind of, once I was done with that and had rested a little bit, I wanted to put what I had learned into use. And that's when I wrote Sorcery and Small Magics. It was a story more about like friendship between two characters mostly, but it was an ensemble cast. And I'm not quite sure now why I was like, I'm going to write my first novel and I'm going to have like 5 viewpoints. Why that sounded so good to me. I think it was what I liked as a reader. And so I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do that. But I don't think I quite had the skills to pull it off. It was a very large cast of characters. And that was really fun to write. I can't even really tell you the plot because it was not a very cohesive plot. I learned a lot from writing it, but it was never a book that was easy to pitch or sum up or explain to someone. And that was part of why when I was writing Sorcery and Small Magics, I was like, I need a pitch. I need an elevator pitch so that I can actually tell people what my book is about. That's what I learned from that first book. But I really love the characters from it. And, maybe at some point I would even go back to that one and it would have to be heavily reworked, but it's not out of the question because I do still like that idea a lot.
My personal thoughts is that everyone should put their very first book on the back burner and come back to it after the next one.
Yeah.
Because you learn so much.
Yeah, you learn so much. And I think I wrote a lot of good prose in that book, but the structure was just very, very meandering. Like it wasn't enough about something, but there's still a lot about the like pretty dreamy prose of it that I would like to recapture. And it was in third person. And also a lot about that larger group dynamic that could be fun or would need to be cut down to size. We'll see.
So, do you have any advice that you would give to aspiring authors?
I mean, this is very common advice, but reading widely, like not just reading in the genre that you want to write in, but reading in whatever genre interests you, or reading nonfiction. That's been so helpful to me and just helps remind me of what I'm aiming for when I'm really stuck on something in my own book, right? Like, oh, yes, this is what it's like to have a finished book in your hands. And this is what it's like to have that experience, to give that experience to other people. And also, I would say make sure you cultivate interests and hobbies outside of writing. I think putting books out is great, but it's also such a like overwhelming experience, and it can take up so much of your time and energy and thoughts. I think it's really important to have other things that you can go to and kind of sink into and get enjoyment from to kind of get a break from that. Which isn't, that's not writing advice or authoring advice, but I think it helps support those things.
It's so true though, because you do get burnt out and you need something else to phase to, before you get back into it.
Yeah, and it can be hard. It can be hard too. Like I know I'm so excited about writing, right? And telling this story and doing this stuff that sometimes you kind of forget that other things exist. So I think it's good to be intentional about it and to build that awareness of like, no, sometimes I need to step back and do something else. Even if I don't necessarily feel like it, it will be good in the long run to go and garden or, play a game or something.
I'm going to put that one in my back pocket.
Me too. I need to remind myself of it all the time of like, hey, maybe you should do something else for a while.
So, where can listeners find out more about you?
My website is maigadoocy.com, and from there, there's a sign up for my newsletter, which is the best way to stay up to date. And I'm also on Instagram at Maiga Doocy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. This has been amazing, and I'm totally not going to reread it again. Just kidding, I am. But
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this. I loved all of your questions. This was great.
of course. And stay tuned for next week's episode on Right Here, Right Queer podcast. Thanks for listening.